In today's video, we're going to talk about some of the challenges that photographers face when they first start shooting video. Hey everyone, and welcome back to another video. So today's video is a follow-up on the last video that I uploaded, which talked about some of the reasons why, if you are a photographer, why you may want to start offering videography services. And so I wanted to, in that previous video, we talked about the reasons why you may want to do it. But in this video, I want to talk about some of the things that I had to overcome, some of the gotchas that I came across when I first started shooting video. And the reason that I'm making this video is that sometimes I find that there's a bit of cockiness to photographers, and I include myself in that group, by the way, where we think that we know lighting, we know composition, so we don't need any help. We know how to shoot video, even though we've never done it before. And so today I want to give you some of the things, I want to show you some of the things that I stumbled upon when I first got started, and how I overcame them, and also just to give you some, I guess, advice on how to maybe get started in a different way to me, so that you don't have any of the challenges that I faced. And the first challenge that I found was a technical one, which is frame rate. Now, I already knew what frame rate was. I understood it. You probably also understand what frame rate is. It is the number of frames that your camera is set to shoot at every second. So per second, how many frames it's going to shoot, which is essentially photographs. So when you play back these photographs, it gives the illusion of motion. So you can set your camera, depending on the camera that you have, to a number of different frame rates. Now, the most common ones that I've worked with in the past are 24 frames per second and 30 frames per second. But I would have to say that probably 24 frames per second is the most common one that I've worked with. And the reason for that is that it is one of the components that can make your footage look more cinematic. Now, you would have heard this term cinematic. It gets thrown around quite a lot these days. Cinematic simply means that your footage starts to look like that of a cinema movie. And there's a lot of components that go into that. There's color treatment, there's composition, there's aspect ratios, and there is frame rate. And what it turns out is that 24 frames per second is the most commonly used, or has been the most commonly used frame rate when it comes to cinema, even from the days at the beginning of cinema. And so 24 frames per second is what I shoot at. But the gotcha that I want to talk about is that you should be careful to not mix frame rates in your video. So if you're shooting multiple takes, you always need to make sure that all of your cameras, if you're using multiple cameras, that you set all of your cameras to the same frame rate. Because when it comes to the edit, it's going to look a little bit different, and it's going to be hard to make it look like it all came from one camera. So that's the first thing that I wanted to point out to you. Okay, so next we have the exposure triangle, and essentially and fundamentally, the exposure triangle works exactly the same way in video as it does in photography. However, when you're shooting video, there are some limitations and some considerations that you need to be aware of. Now, I would say that shutter speed is probably the #1 method that we use to control our exposure. But in video, we have a starting point. There is a recommended starting point. And if you want your footage to look as cinematic as possible, you set your shutter speed to double that of your frame rate. So in our case, we're shooting at 24 frames per second. So 24 times 2 is 48. So we would set our shutter speed to 1/48 of a second. That is going to give you some really nice motion blur. Now, unless you've got a cinema camera, your camera may not have 1/48 of a second as an option. So you'll have to go to the next value, the closest value, which is 1/50th of a second, typically. And it's a little bit different, but it's not enough to make a difference. And if you follow that rule where you double your frame rate to set your shutter speed as your starting point, then that is going to give you the most cinematic looking motion blur. Next on the exposure triangle, we have aperture. And this works exactly the same way as it does in photography. However, be aware that now you are filming a moving target. Potentially that target could move closer to the camera or further away from the camera, thereby stepping out of that area of focus. And so you just need to be aware that you may not be able to shoot at f2.8 if you've got a moving subject. Just something to keep in mind. Lastly, on the exposure triangle, we've got ISO. The one thing that you need to understand here is that you're not going to be able to push your ISO as far as you can push it when you're shooting photos, because when you're shooting photos, you're shooting in RAW. And when you're shooting video, you're more likely to be shooting in a compressed format. There is such a thing as raw video. However, it doesn't get used that much because it's quite sort of CPU intensive, as well as it takes up a lot of space on your cards. And so most people still use a compressed format when they're shooting video. And something that you need to be aware of is that getting noise out of video that is compressed, it's a lot harder than taking it out of raw video. And so just understand that you're not going to be able to push it as much as you can when you're shooting photos. And the only way to really find out how far you can push it is to experiment with your camera and under different lighting conditions as well. So that's going to give you an indication of how well it deals with the midtones and with the shadows, specifically when it comes to noise. Okay, so next I want to talk about lights, because the lighting systems that we use in photography are typically different to what we use in video, because in photography we use a lot of flash and a lot of strobe. The one thing that I will tell you is that obviously for video we need to use continuous light. And that continuous light could be an artificial light like the one that I'm using here, or it could be natural light. But this is the thing. You need to make sure that the lighting system or the lighting setup that you use works for your whole scene. So if you're shooting an interview, then that's fine, because the subject typically is not going to move around. But if you're filming someone that is moving, say on stage, then you need to make sure that the lighting system works no matter where that person stands in the frame. And that's something that I first struggled with, because as a photographer, what I always used to do is I'd have my subject, I'd set up my lights, and then I would shoot. But it never occurred to me that the person would actually move. And that's something that I first struggled with. So one of the things that I do now is, before I start shooting, I do a walkthrough. So it's a rehearsal where I get the person to move around, and I won't even have a camera with me. I'll just look and see what the light is doing as they move around in the area that is defined as the frame. I don't do that whilst I'm shooting, because there's a lot of other things that I need to pay attention to when I'm shooting, and I don't want to think about the lighting. If I know that the lighting is right, then I don't have to think about it when I'm actually shooting and trying to maintain things like focus and composition and all that other stuff. Next is white balance. This used to get me every single time, because it's not something that we think about really in photography, because when we're shooting photos, we're shooting in RAW, so we don't have to think about white balance. We can always correct it afterwards. But it's not the same case in video, because again, video is shooting in a compressed format. So always have a gray card with you. If you don't have a gray card, take a piece of white paper with you. Just something that you can use to set the white balance at least close enough to that when it comes to the edit, maybe then you have to tweak it only a little bit. But if you're way off, in photography, it didn't matter. You could always bring it back. But in video, it doesn't work the same. You probably won't be able to recover it fully. Okay, so next we've got focus, and this is going to depend on a lot of things. So how much light there is your subject moving, the camera that you're using, loads and loads of stuff. The one thing that I will say is this: what you don't want is, you don't want footage where the camera is hunting back and forth trying to get focus on your subject. That looks really amateur. What I would recommend that you do instead is that, first of all, you use the autofocus to set the initial focus on your subject, switch the lens to manual focus so that there's no more hunting, and then set an aperture that is large enough to allow your subject to move around within the frame and still not move outside of that area of focus. If you get really good, you could also try to manually focus as you go along, but that's going to take a little bit of practice. But initially, what I would do is I would close down the lens to something like f11 so that your subject has enough room to move around in that frame and still stay sharp. Okay, so next we've got audio, and audio is really, really important. I can't emphasize how important it is. In fact, I think it's more important than the actual video itself. People will sit through shitty video, but they will not listen to shitty audio. Now, when it comes to audio, the one thing that I would say is that you cannot use the microphone that's built into your camera. I don't care what kind of camera you have, it'll sound rubbish regardless of what camera you have. If you use the onboard mic, that is used for syncing up in post only, called scratch audio, but you're not going to use it as the primary source of your audio. I would encourage you to invest in some sort of microphone, something like this, which is a wireless microphone that's made by Rode, and that just clips onto your clothes, and the receiver is on the camera, so wirelessly it transmits the audio. You can also have a little lavalier mic, which are the ones that clip onto your clothes as well, little microphones. These are directional mics, boom mics, and they'll sit just off the frame there, and they will record audio, very good audio from something like this. This is a Rode NTG3. I've got links for all this stuff in the description. or maybe something a little bit smaller like that. Regardless of what you use, you need to get that microphone close to you. So even the most expensive microphone is not going to yield good results if it's too far away from you. So you want to get it as close to you. In the case of the clip-on mics, it's generally accepted that people see them. With the boom mics, you want to get it so that it's just outside of camera, but again, as close to you without being in the frame. But this is something that is absolutely critical, I think, if you want to start introducing or providing video services as part of what you do. Okay, so next we've got something that I don't think I actually thought about before I started shooting video, and that is assets. And what I mean by that are things like titles, graphics, animation, sound effects, that sort of thing. So for example, if I want to encourage you to click the like button and subscribe to the channel, I could just show you this animation, and it goes a little bit further in me trying to encourage a response from you. And when I first started shooting video, I just thought that this is something that you do inside of Premiere. But what's inside of Premiere is quite limited. It doesn't really look that great, to be honest. And you'll be spending a lot of time inside of After Effects trying to build your own assets. It's really not that practical, at least not when you're first getting started. So you're probably better off going to a service that provides you with assets. Now, you can Google and look around, and there is some free stuff, but I probably recommend that you maybe check out some of the dedicated services for this type of thing. Now, I'm not affiliated with either of these websites. However, these are the ones that I've used in the past, and they've got thousands of assets, and they're relatively inexpensive. The first one is Motion Array, and the second one is Envato Elements. Again, I'm not affiliated with either of them, but I'll put a link in the description if you want to check them out. So I get all of my assets from either of these two sites, with the exception of music. And the reason I say that is because the music from these sort of websites where they provide a lot of assets tends to be not of very high quality. It feels a little bit produced, a little bit similar, sort of elevator music. So instead, what I do is I get all of my music from a platform called Audio. Now, Audio are great. And look, straight up, I am affiliated with them. If you are interested in checking them out, there is a link in the description of this video, which will provide me with a small commission at no expense to you. But that's not the reason that I'm talking about them now. The reason I'm talking about them is because Audio is a platform where genuine musicians can apply to license their music, their albums, all of those songs. And so they make them available to us to be able to use them in our videos. And we can use that music with one license only. So in a lot of other places where they sell licenses to music, you have to buy different licenses depending on how you want to use that music. So you don't have to worry about that with Audio. Audio just give you the one license and you can use it for commercial stuff, or if you're just doing YouTube stuff, you can just use it for that. It doesn't really make any difference to them. The quality of the music is really, really good, and they're probably, I would say, the most affordable platform when it comes to licensing music. And so that's the reason that I've used them. Again, there's a link in the description if you want to check them out, but I just thought I would bring that up because, again, if you are going to be spending time making those videos, you want to make them as good as possible. And so music is one of those things that can really help to lift the quality, the production quality of your video. I'm using music in this video right now. It came from Audio, and I think you'll find that if you go in there and check them out, I think you'll be really impressed with the quality of the stuff that they've got. Okay, so we've got the last one now, and what I think is probably the biggest one, and that is editing. So my first edits I used to do on iMovie on a Mac. And you quickly realize that there's a lot of limitations. You can't really do anything beyond really basic stuff on iMovie. So then what I did is I jumped onto the professional platform that I thought everybody was using, which is Premiere. Now, Premiere is great. However, it's really expensive. And so you've got a platform that you need to have a subscription to if you want to keep using it. So you can't just buy it outright. You have to pay the subscription. And so going forward, the problem that I found myself now is that I've got some old projects that I've worked on in the past that sometimes clients will contact me and maybe want to make a revised version of a video, which means I have to open it up inside of Premiere, which means I'm locked into Premiere. And it's really expensive. So I've got this ongoing cost that I didn't realize was unnecessary, because this is something that I don't think gets taught very much, which is DaVinci Resolve, which is the alternative to Premiere Pro. Has a free version, and I would go as far as saying that you could you could actually edit an entire Hollywood movie with the free version of DaVinci Resolve. So there's a free version and there's a paid version. But the paid version, even if you needed to go to the paid version, it's a one-off payment. There's no subscription. And I think from what I worked out was that the one-off payment is less than 12 months of the subscription for the Adobe Premiere Pro program that I've got. And so going back, if I could go back in time, I would probably just not get started with Premiere Pro. I would go straight into DaVinci Resolve, which is just as powerful and it can do everything that Premiere can do. However, I wouldn't be stuck in this thing where I have to keep giving Adobe a certain amount of money every month just to be able to open up my projects. And so that is probably the biggest thing, or the biggest piece of advice that I will give you that is going to save you money in the long run. Learn how to use DaVinci Resolve now. You can use it with a free version, and there's a good chance that you will never have to upgrade to the paid version. Okay, so that's it for this video. I hope you enjoyed it. Look, we went quite fast, and so if you have any questions about anything that I talked about here, leave them in the comment section below. I'd be happy to help you with anything, and if we need to go into more depth, I can always make another video and just dive deep into any one of these topics or anything else that you're interested when it comes to video. If you did like the video and you found it useful, I would really appreciate it if you could click the like button, and also if you want to see more content like this, if you could subscribe to the channel and click the notification bell, that would be great, because then you're notified when I upload a new video. Again, I hope you enjoyed this video. I want to thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.